Well, let's talk now to Nawaf Al-Thani, former Qatari military attaché in the US and former Director of Defence Intelligence Operations in Qatar. We're very grateful for your time here on BBC News. Listening to that, and you were listening to what the Prime Minister was saying, how hopeful are you of further hostage releases?
Thank you much for having me. Well, I mean, as an observer, obviously I'm not part of the government and I can't speak on their behalf, but as an observer of what's been said and what's been done, there is still hope, although hope is disappearing quite rapidly with every bomb and every shell that lands in Gaza from the IDF.
In terms of future hostage releases, I know the picture is very unclear and I recognise what you've just said, but over the last few days there have been various reports of perhaps up to 50 releases might happen. Is that a sort of figure that you recognise, that you're hearing as well?
Well, I don't have, unfortunately, a figure, but looking at the track record of the Qatari Foreign Ministry and the Qatari diplomacy in the past, it has worked through stages. And it wouldn't be surprising that this conflict as well, with de-escalatory diplomacy and negotiation and mediation with obviously the Egyptians and other partners, would take some time. But it's a good start. As the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs said in his statement today, we've moved from one position where we are to a much more positive position by releasing hostages. We just hope that this will continue. And as an observer, I see that the track record of Qatar in this type of mediation has been a successful one in the past 2 decades. And there's no reason to believe that that wouldn't continue. Unfortunately, there is that variable of the ongoing operations by the IDF and the escalatory nature of those operations that may hinder any success in the future.
I'll come back to that thought in a moment, but there is plenty of talk about pauses, about ceasefires. President Biden has been really clear that that shouldn't happen before all of the hostages have been released. In terms of your perspective, any sort of sequencing towards a ceasefire, how do you see that?
Well, for me, Matthew, I look at results, and if we're going to judge an activity by achievements and results, then what the Qatari mediation and others and other partners like the Egyptians have been achieving, while stating that a ceasefire and a cessation of hostilities will increase the success of those mediation, I would certainly believe that that is the perfect, or if any perfect way exists, the closest to a perfect way to exist, to save as many hostages as possible.
Let me ask you some wider questions, because Qatar, of course, is the home to Hamas's leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Has anything fundamentally changed in that relationship between Qatar and Hamas as a result of what we saw on October the 7th?
Well, let us step back from that question a bit, because the relationship with Hamas, as it was with many relationships that Qatar had, were based on achievement of peace and results of mediation. And
sure, but I just want you to address that question, because you've talked of mediation, but also you saw what happened on October the 7th, and you house and fund Hamas's leader. I'm asking you, as a result of that sort of savagery, in any way, has the relationship changed at all, been reconsidered?
Well, actually, if we look at the funding, which is very important, I think, that question, because a lot of confusion happens in that area. The funding that Qatar has presented in the past has been in coordination with the Israelis through the Israeli banks, and co-signed by the Americans, to build hospitals, schools, and other humanitarian assistance for Gaza residents, and not for certain entities like Hamas or others. But obviously, those schools, unfortunately, are now rubble. Those hospitals have been destroyed.
Sure, but I've tried twice now to get you to address what happened on October the 7th, because we saw militants glory in the killing. And I'm asking you, if after what you saw, are you still prepared to host Hamas there in your country?
Obviously, as I said, I'm not an official. I'm sure if you ask the
I'm just
Qatari
asking
official,
for your view.
well, my view, I think, is that the current statement of Qatar is the healthiest, I think, in the region. Hold everyone who commits crimes against civilians accountable. That was also mentioned today in the statement by the Prime Minister. All by the standard of international law. Hold everyone to the same standard, and everyone who commits a crime against a civilian must face a just and legal outcome. The same thing will come for that civilian lives. The Qatari position was very clear. All civilian lives. Qatari never said Palestinian civilian lives, but all civilian lives do matter and are sacred. And the surprise today that by the Prime Minister, for instance, he mentioned in his statement, if I remember, that he was surprised by the rhetoric by the Israeli government by attacking Qatar, while, in fact, two citizens of Israel that have been released and now back with their families owe in part their secure return not to their own government, the right-wing government of Netanyahu, but by the efforts of the de-escalatory approach by the Qatari government and their partners, like the Egyptians and others. And that is a fact, that is a tangible, measurable fact that this de-escalatory diplomacy will bring good results. But it needs more than one party to do this, and the Israelis need to be serious about that. And one part about that is to allow humanitarian aid to enter, to allow for civilians not to be killed in droves.
Nawaf, I have to end it there because we're out of time. Nawaf Al-Thani, thank you very much for joining us live there from Doha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.